by increasing positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. In education, Rebecca Oxford, somebody we're quite familiar with from her studies on learning strategies, presents a model which is an expansion of PERMA, and it's a model which can be applied very well in educational context. The model is called emphatics, and the very acronym suggests what the core of the model is: empathics and empathy. So Rebecca talks about a model which consists of the following components: emotion and empathy, meaning and motivation, perseverance, including resilience, agency and autonomy, time, habits of mind, intelligences, character strengths, self-factors, especially self-efficacy. Positive psychology in education, it's a sort of blossoming field at the moment. And in research, it focuses on such areas of study as positivity and affectivity in teaching learning, motivational attitudinal factors, strengths of teachers and learners as facilitative aspects of teaching learning processes, educational institutions and their functions enabling success, and importantly, the well-being and development of both teachers and learners. And now to the point to my own study. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm talking about a trainees' experience of positive psychology classes, which were implemented in program of studies as introductory course in positive psychology under the title Innovative and Creative Approaches to Teaching a Foreign Language, Elements of Positive Psychology in English as a Foreign Language. The course was part of TEFL module consisting of lecture and classes, 45 minutes, introduced in the second year of teaching profile English Philology Department of the University of Silesia, Poland. And it was the whole group which consisted of 27 students, future teachers of English. The syllabus of the course embraced lectures on Introduction to Positive Psychology, the models I sort of sketched out today, PERMA and emphatics, lectures on positive characteristics, emotions, feelings, and also importantly, the role of contextual factors such as environment and in particular institutions, school and their functions. So these were interactive lectures. When I gave some theory, we did some task, question, answer sessions, but importantly, we also had classes which were very practical. The students were preparing presentations of language activities, which included tasks which focused both on language and affective objective. And some of the tasks were used from the source by Mark Helgesen, who is one of the most famous practitioners of positive psychology, a professor of EFL at one of the universities in Japan. So Mark Helgesen, 2012, the publication. And his motto is, happy students learn more, work longer, have more enthusiasm. The trainees were doing presentations in which they were introducing the task, the linguistic and objective, linguistic objectives and affective objectives. And we did actual teaching. We had a peer teaching, so we all participated in the activities. In the end, we had a discussion in which we assessed the activity. We asked questions and tried to answer them. Well, I have to stress that obviously this was done before the pandemic, so we had a kind of care and share sessions in the classroom. Okay, the positive psychology activities that we used come under the headings such as remember good things, do kind things, say thank you, friends and family, forgive, health and your body, mindfulness, work with problems and stress, and also student-generated tasks. And here is the source for the major activities we used. And there's some illustration from Helgesen. Remember good things, notice good things, say thank you, do kind things, friends and family, forgive, stay healthy, deal with problems. And in the end of the course, I asked my student to write a short narrative, reflective narrative, focusing on their experience of positive psychology classes that we covered through one semester. Having analyzed all the narratives, I came up with the 4 categories for analysis. So basically things the students were reflecting upon. First of all, reflection which related to life-changing perspective that positive psychology classes offered. Secondly, teaching and learning facilitation due to the use of positive psychology. Then comments on positive psychology as a course, and also a short assessment of possible problems with positive psychology in the sense of class activities. And here I have sort of quotations from narratives relating to each of these categories. So life-changing perspective, the general motto that the students, one of the students put was changing negativity into positivity. So life-changing perspective, students said, positive psychology classes made me very happy. Somebody else said, I felt more confident and changed my attitude to life. Somebody stressed that positive psychology activities relate positive things in our lives with knowledge, language knowledge, and competence. Noticing small things in our lives and being grateful for them. Still within the same category of life-changing perspectives, these classes were really important for me. They changed my perception of the world and other people. They made me more confident. I started to believe in myself, sharing good things about others. It started to be my daily routine, the good things, and I started to care more about my body, physical health. That was one of the aspects of positive psychology. Still within life-changing perspective, I learned to focus on my strengths. Now I'm more confident and grateful person. You can see this confidence in oneself actually reappears in the narratives here. The second area of reflection related to teaching and learning facilitation. How can positive psychology and the types of activities and the assumptions I talked about can make the teaching and learning processes easier, more effective, more pleasurable? And somebody said that these activities make foreign language lesson more exciting and colorful, and students are more motivated, inspired, and happy, as the students were in our class when we did the activities. Also in teaching learning facilitation, somebody said that they were more humanistic and less artificial. They were more holistic in terms of self-development, awareness of positive things about teachers and learners, positive relationships, student strengths. Teaching learning facilitation continues. So activities were seen as easy to do and offered good motivation. And somebody said that young people like to talk about themselves and their feelings. And we did talk about it in those activities in different ways. They also said that positive psychology tasks develop emotional maturity of students and teachers. Also, somebody said it's easy to adapt any topic of the course, any course book, to work on positive activities. And they help to integrate students. They develop cooperation and respect. They make students more self-aware, on the other hand. Also, the fact that these positive psychology activities were diverse and they were novelty. So they could raise enthusiasm for learning, and also because they created friendly atmosphere in the classroom between the students and between students and the teacher, which I can testify to, in fact. Also, positive activities are about noticing things, right? And here in positive activities, we notice things, but we also learn at the same time. As you remember, each activity has both language focus, so like development of speaking, development of reporting, for instance, but also affective, right? Affective side, so like developing interaction, for instance. Okay. And some more, building confidence, finding balance in life, being happy, thinking positively. Somebody said that they helped students to understand their feelings and to appreciate small things in life. Feeling comfortable, reducing aggression, this kind of climate in the classroom which develops thanks to these activities. Positive psychology is, of course, another area of comments observed in the narratives. Somebody said, these classes opened my eyes, and the knowledge about and practice of positive psychology changed my perspective on life, teaching, and learning. However, the students also saw possible problems. Some of the activities they seem to assess as a little bit childish, some a little bit too sensitive because they operate within this area of affectivity and emotions. Sometimes they said they might be too personal. So obviously it is a teacher's discretion and teacher's awareness and knowledge of his or her class, whether certain activities will be appropriate, that plays the major role in their effectiveness. Individual approach is needed, right? Some students may be too shy. They shouldn't be used too very extensively. They shouldn't be a routine of the lesson. Somebody said age factor is a blockage here because we shouldn't use them with children, which I don't think I would totally agree. They may generate positive noise, possible noise in the classroom, but obviously noise can also be effective, positive. So, and somebody had mixed feelings, right? Mixed feelings saying that people do not really want to share these things, these sort of more affective oriented areas of their life. Okay, and somebody to finish with these reflections, I would say, I will quote use the quotation of one of the students. The classes in positive psychology definitely stood out for me from all the other subjects during our studies. And conclusions, I suppose I'm finishing. So the role of positive psychology elements, according to the trainees, I'll now try to put it all together. So first of all, summarizing the comments we just listened to, based on the reflective narratives. First of all, the students talk about the changed frame of mind, developing openness, acceptance, empathy, like in the model of Rebecca Oxford, empathics. Becoming more self-aware and learner-aware, so this affective side. Expressing positivity in teacher talk and behavior. Having impact on classroom climate, which was one of the most important effect of using positive psychology tasks. And to finish with, I would say, again, using the words of one of the students, I feel better now, and I'm also smiling a lot. I think that positive psychology should be taught in every school. And I would say in every teacher training program, because it actually shows that teaching a language is very different from teaching any other subject, because language is a tool of expression. And what we did in this classroom was we tried to come together more closely by using the language, by developing our language competence, trying to see how it can be implemented in our classrooms. And in fact, I have to say that it greatly developed the positive rapport I had with the students. And most of these students are my students in MA seminar at the moment. And actually, some of them are writing their works on positive psychology. Some of them in their teaching practice are already using positive psychology activities in the classroom. So this is something which went beyond the classroom itself. So it's sort of going on, having its own life in the teaching practice of these students of mine. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about the critical problems at the beginning. I don't know where that came from.
Danuta?
Yes.
Danuta?
Yes, Maria. Grasa.
I would like to ask you something. Is this positive psychology in line with positive pedagogy?
Yes.
And
yes.
If yes, is it? Are you aware of the work of the Brazilian professor Francisco Gomes de Matos about peace linguistics?
Yes, and especially, yes, I am, and I know about the recent publication on peace education, which I think he has an article. It's Rebecca Oxford and her colleagues, if I'm right.
Oh wait.
Yes. I am aware, and this is going on as like one of the things positive psychology people like Rebecca Oxford or Sarah Mercier or Professor Matos is doing now. The positive education, peace education.
Thank you, Danuta. I've enjoyed a lot. Thank you. It was a pleasure seeing you.
Thanks for coming to this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Professor Danuta, thank you for your speech. I think that it's now more necessary because in the pandemic situation, students are becoming a lot distressed, and
Yes.
even some of them are depressed.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and so it's urgent to help them because the situation is, I think that your proposal is quite important nowadays.
Thank you very much. And I would like to add that actually I started 2 years ago, and what I reported here was from 2 years ago, but I continue with positive psychology, and I already have some findings about positive psychology in the pandemic, which became, as you were saying, an urgent need and something which is really helpful to them. And I already see the slight difference between the perception in the study I presented today, where positive psychology was first of all seen as an important builder of climate and interaction. Now, in the comments of my students during the pandemic, when we're doing positive psychology, there is much more focus on the self and the positive development of a kind of well-being and more awareness. But I have to say that obviously doing positive psychology online in terms of activities is very handicapped, because previously we were doing it in the classroom, we were doing it together, right? I was part of it, and it created a very special bond. And then I had to move to online, but it still has a lot of effect in the online system. And you're absolutely right, Professor Leonor, that we do need it very much, especially now. I do have students who are clinically depressed at the moment, and I work with them individually. And it's very difficult situation for the students. We have to be aware of it and show understanding in various ways. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I think my time is probably up. Okay.
Sorry.
Monica?
Yes. Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Hi. Very interesting. Thank you for your contribution. And I was going to ask, you mentioned that, but now you say that you have incorporated that as part of your syllabus, let's call it, and that's one was going to be my question. So it's a good thing because students, teacher learners or teacher students really need it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see that it's helping them individually, but it's also they also incorporate it in their own teaching. So that was the initial the two things, right? The personal development, the well-being of the teacher, the well-being of the learner. So, and we will definitely continue that. And we have a couple of interesting projects with my MA students and BA students doing positive education, positive psychology in EFL. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Monica, for response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, I think it's time for the second presentation.
Yes, we don't have a chief person to ask for the next presenters. This was a lack in our organization. So please, the second speaker, can you initiate your presentation? Who is it?
Professor CHIRSHEVA. I don't know whether she's with us.
I'm going to write the sequence on the chat, okay?
Well, I have it in front of me. Professor CHIRSHEVA, if you could check whether she's present.
I don't think she's here.
Not here.
No.
No, she's not here.
So should I'm the third in line. Should I continue?
Yes, Barbara, you can continue. I think that's the best way. Okay.
Okay, I'll try to share. Hopefully I am able to...
We already had one disaster, so now it will go well.
Well, that was not really a disaster. That can, I think, can happen.
Coming up.
Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
But it's
And
not
can you
going
also
in.
hear me? Very good, very good. And I'll just try to move these slides. Can you also see the second slide now that I have gone on to the second?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yes. Right, then a very good afternoon, morning for some of you, but afternoon from here in Italy, the north of Italy. My name is Barbara Hofer, and I will be talking about research into multilingual competencies in young learners. Now, the motivation, or at least one of the reasons for conducting this research, was that we find that there is something of an exaggerated preoccupation with single languages and with skills in single languages, and also with the native speaker norm. Also, or perhaps paradoxically, in multilingual regions such as South Tyrol, where my study is situated. And there is also very little understanding that multilingual competences are vital, are really, really important for the next generation to cope in a multilingual society. And also what is missing or lacking is an understanding that multilinguals have naturally got different competences and different skills, different abilities in their single or various languages. But how am I going to structure my presentation? I will be saying a few words about the theoretical framework, the multilingual competence, or the concept of multilingual competences and what we mean by that. I will then go on to talk about the study, the context in which the study is situated, the main aims of the study, and the procedure. And I will also present very briefly a test tool that we administered in the study, in the research, the multilingual competence test. And lastly, I will present preliminary finding, and you will forgive me for only presenting preliminary findings, but they have not been published yet. So I cannot, and I will not be able to say too much about it yet. And I will conclude with an outlook. Right, so complexity is a major characteristic of this research, and therefore it was only logical for me to use, or for theoretical, complex dynamic systems theory to serve as a theoretical framework for this research. And one of the big advantages of complex dynamic systems theory, or complex thinking in general, is of course that it affords us a holistic approach to language learning and language development, as opposed to more reductionist views that we find in a lot of the literature. In the dynamic model of multilingualism, which was proposed by Herlina and Jesna at the University of Innsbruck, complexity is seen as a key component, a key aspect of multilingual learning and development. And both the languages, but also the learner, are conceived as complex systems, which are themselves embedded in complex in a complex society, a complex context, as we will see shortly. Complexity is, in the dynamic model of multilingualism, seen as a function of the many and multidirectional interactions between the multiple languages in the mind, the multiple agents that work together, and also, or in general, the multiple factors that impact language learning or multilingual learning. And a major characteristic of the dynamic model of multilingualism as proposed by Herdin and Jesner is emergent properties, which means that because of these complex interactions between different languages in the mind, new properties emerge. There is a complete transformation of the entire system, and qualitative changes eventuate, and new qualities, new properties emerge. And these new properties or new qualities are subsumed under the term multilingualism factor, or M effect also, and they include, for example, a heightened metalinguistic awareness and also cross-linguistic awareness, an enhanced multilingual monitor, and this monitor helps supervising, helps controlling, processing, and multilingual operations at the cognitive level, and they also include special language learning, language management, and language maintenance skills. And another important factor to add is that the M effect or multilingualism factor is seen as having facilitative effects on language learning, as supportive of language learning. In complexity theory, context also plays a very important role. Context is not seen as separate from the learner and the multilingual system, but the two are really seen as closely interlinked, as coupled. So the social context, or what we normally would call the social context, also the physical, are interconnected with the cognitive, with the individual learner user. So context is not separate, it's not discrete from the multilingual system and the learner, but they are one. And this is particularly relevant for the South Tyrol context in which my study is situated, because South Tyrol is an area, a region where, of course, because of historical reasons, language learning and linguistic identity are deeply, really deeply imbued with ideological values. In fact, in the current research, complexity relates or is linked to different initial conditions. Initial conditions are also a concept taken from dynamic systems or complexity theory. So initial conditions can contribute to very different learning outcomes, and the initial conditions in the current study relate in particular to sociolinguistic contexts, educational contexts, different classroom composition, and different language constellations in the individual language learner. But I will say more about this in a moment. Before I start with the study, just a few words on what we mean by multilingual competence or multi-competence. The term was, of course, introduced by Cook in the 20th century. Cook proposed several definitions for multi-competence. One of the earlier ones is the knowledge of more than one language in the same mind. And one of the more recent ones, the overall system of a mind or community that uses more than one language. Now, the notion as I use it and understand it is slightly similar, slightly different, not too dissimilar from the concept of multilingual proficiency that Herdin and Jesner proposed, which subsumes the different language systems, CLIN, which is cross-linguistic interactions at the cognitive level, and the N factor. So multi-competence, as I use it, relates to the presence, interaction, and cross-fertilization of different languages in the mind, and means or relates to all the competences, the skills, the strategies, everything that multilinguals can do in order to cope with linguistic or multilingual situations in their everyday lives, but also to tackle multilingual tasks as was required of them in this study. It might therefore also be referred to as a sort of multilingual resourcefulness or multilingual agency, again inclusive of metalinguistic awareness and cross-linguistic awareness, and just an ability to work across languages, to reflect across languages, to make connections between languages, find patterns and apply them to different codes. And just a general skillfulness at exploiting the affordances that are given. So the study itself was conducted, as I said before, in a highly complex setting. South Tyrol is located in the north east of Italy. It borders on Austria and Switzerland, and there are 3 linguistic groups that live together. There's a German majority, an Italian community, and a Latin community. And it is true to say probably that tensions exist mostly between Italian and German, the Italian and German community, and that relates or can be traced back to World War I, when this region was annexed by Italy. It was formerly part of Austria. That's also why people speak German there. And during the fascist period, then in the 1920s and 30s, the German language, German newspapers, German schools were forbidden. And so this troubled history is like a curse that still haunts social life and also is very visible in everyday life today. The study, 209 children in primary school participated in this study. The children were drawn from 10 different primary schools, all German language schools. All of the children are multilingual in the sense that they study 3 languages in school, German, Italian and English, but they do so they engage in multilingual routines to different degrees depending on where they live, where they go to school to, and what education they receive, because some of the children are in multilingual programs and some in traditional mainstream programs, so they receive different amounts of German, Italian and English inputs. And one of the major differences relates to the out-of-school context. Some of the children live in areas where they hardly ever have contact with L2 Italian speakers, and other children, in contrast, live in the bigger towns, the capital, for instance, where there is a very high concentration of L2 Italian speakers. And that obviously also reflects in classroom composition, with some year groups being very monolingual and others very multilingual. So what I did is I grouped the learners into 5 cohorts and arranged them on a continuum. And as you can see here, the 5 groups from top to bottom. At the top, the most multilingual group, and then as we go down the continuum, contexts become more multilingual, with group 5 here composed of children who receive multilingual education and whose out-of-school context is highly multilingual, because it is located in the city where there's a high percentage of Italian speakers and also other language speakers. And that is reflected here also. You can see in one school, for instance, children, or the out-of-school context is very German, Germanophone. In other schools, there's a high percentage of Italian speakers in the out-of-school context, in the environment. So multilingual experiences for these 5 cohorts are very different. Altogether, there are 12 research questions, which I am not going to present here. Of course, I summarize the research questions as how do sociolinguistic and educational context impact language learning, and which of these multilingual experiences predict successful learning and multilingual competence. And to find out, several tests were administered, single language tests, various questionnaires, background questionnaires, but also questionnaires on attitudes and strategy use. Individual interviews were conducted with subsamples of the children. And the main parts for this study, or the most important part, is the multilingual competence test that the children had to complete. And this test is composed of two components, one linguistic and one metalinguistic. And I will show you very briefly what I mean by that. Children had to work, this was a 2-hour test. Children had to work across languages. There were some tasks that required them to work with the 3 curricular languages, German, Italian, and English. And they always had to solve a problem and indicate also how they arrived at the solution. So that was the metacognitive, the metalinguistic component. And as you can see here, there are 3 languages used. The children in this task had to identify the 2 synonymous sentences across 2 languages, and they had to identify the odd one out. Other tasks had required them to work with languages that they had not encountered before, so they had to somehow find a way of decoding text in novel languages, and again they had to explain how they arrived at the solution, and that again was then the metacognitive component. So in this case, Dutch, but then also Latin, which the children in German language schools do not command. Briefly, what about the findings? Preliminary findings we found, as you can see here, that the children, the more multilingual groups, group 4 and 5, achieved the best results on the multilingual competence test. And this is a very promising finding, as it goes to show that multilingual education, or being multilingual, is not detrimental to children's linguistic competence, but on the contrary, very conducive to language learning. It fosters their linguistic awareness and multilingual competency. The findings corroborate earlier findings that we carried out in Italian primary schools, where we arrived at similar conclusions. And to end the presentation, I think I'm beyond the time that I have, but very briefly, the conclusion, we then found, or we can conclude, that more multilingual experience translates into more multi-competence. We found that the children that participated in this study developed very early on a good set of, a very specific set of skills and abilities that qualifies them as multi-competent. And these skills are inclusive of a heightened awareness of language forms and structures and functions across languages. We found that they are very able to transfer knowledge and skill from one language to another, also to new languages that they had not encountered before. And we also found that they have a very high tolerance of ambiguity, because in the interview that came out very clearly that they really enjoyed, they really had fun working out meaning, and they were very proud to be able to work with languages that they had not studied in school. French, which I haven't mentioned before, Spanish, which I haven't mentioned, but all of these languages that children had, of course, not come into contact with earlier. So what implications can we draw? It is, of course, desirable, especially for a multilingual context as the one in South Tyrol, that there's a broader recognition of the positive learning outcomes of multilingual learning. in South Tyrol or in German schools in South Tyrol, I have to say language or multilingual learning is still very controversial, because the argument is that by implementing multilingual education, something is taken away from the first language, in this case German. The German at the political level and education authority level, the major preoccupation, as I said right in the beginning, is to foster single language competencies, mainly the German, the mother tongue of the children. But hopefully there will be more studies in this direction, and hopefully there will eventually be more recognition of the value, the added value of multilingual competencies. And with that, I would conclude this presentation. I hope I have not gone beyond the time that I was allocated, and I thank you very much. Okay. Okay. And if I can just say one or two words to Danuta again. In this study, children also, we found that children, there's a huge discrepancy between happiness in the more remote areas and happiness as a factor in the bigger.
Is Barbara frozen for everybody, or just my screen?
Yeah, she froze. She's frozen.
Okay.
In the nick of time. I wrote on the chat who is the next one.
Hello, I guess I'm the next one.
Yeah.
It's my turn. Hello, everyone. My name is Zulima BZEGEZHEVA. I'm from Russia, Sochi State University. I represent Sochi State University. Hope you've heard about it a lot after 22nd Olympic Games. Now it's known all over the world. So I will start my representation. I will try at least. Let me try. Well, do you see the screen? No?
Not yet.
Not yet. I'll try again.
Professors, I left my email on. I'm a monitor here on this room. I left my email on the chat just in case some of you can't present. You can send to my email and I can download and present it to you. Okay.
Okay. Now, do you see the presentation?
Yes, it's perfect now.
Okay, great. So, dear colleagues, nice to meet you. Nice to hear you. And I would like to give information about the personal pronouns, so it will be very specific. It would be specific, and we shall speak about the contextual, mostly meaning of the personal pronoun you, or you in 3 different languages: Russian, English, and Adyg language. If you ever heard about such language, we have 2 names: Circassian and Adyg language. So the purpose of the work is to reveal the dependence of the translation of personal pronouns, you and you, into Russian depending on the contextual environment. And the approach to the translation of the personal pronouns depends on the context and determines the novelty of the study, of our study. It presented not only a meaning of particular language, but the contextual meaning of the personal pronouns you. And this research proposes an algorithm, so to say, for choosing an adequate pronoun for form when translating into Russian in a specific communication situation. Speaking about these pronouns, we cannot forget talking about deixis, because deixis is a fundamental component of the functioning of any language, any person communication. And it is defined in linguistics as an indication of the unit value, which defines an object, person, or fact just mentioned in former statements expressed by lexical or grammatical devices. And according to Linguistic Encyclopedic Dictionary, the main function of deixis is the actualization of the situation, components, and components containing denotative meaning of speech. And the sphere of deixis includes role deixis mostly. It is an indication of the speaker and the addressee, that is participants in the speech act. Thus, pronouns are most often used as deictic words. And Professor Dobrova notes that pronouns of first-person singular and second-person singular traditionally considered as one of the central deictic agents. And these are the first shifters that any child realizes in the process of speech communication. The relevancy of study is determined by the fact that the pronoun is one of the most peculiar parts of speech. It can fulfill contextual importance with its own specific value. Thus, it can be a bright expressive device. And part of speech pronoun is represented in almost all existing languages, as we know, including all the described languages, Russian, English, and Adyg. It has a very high frequency of use in the speech. It has a third place after the nouns and verbs. And despite the fact that in quantity they're expressed by a small group of words. Despite the fact that pronouns can reveal coincidence in semantics of different languages, they have specific features both in structure and in functioning, which can cause interference in translation to all the languages. As for the scientific novelty of the undertaken research, it lies in the approach to the translation of the personal pronouns, you, which depends on their contextual meaning mostly. And the research results can contribute to deepening knowledge about the relationship between language and thinking. And in addition, comparing functioning analysis of personal pronouns you and you based on their contextual values will provide more highly quality translation into Russian or Adyg language. So the aim of this study is mostly to examine the contextual values, as I understand, or as you understood, the personal pronouns and their impact on the translation. And achievement of the set goal determines the solution of some following tasks: to identify the similarities and differences in the paradigm of personal pronouns in different languages, in 3 different languages. The second one is to review contextual value of the personal pronoun you of studied languages. And the third one is to develop an algorithm to find the necessary form of pronouns you inadequate communicative situation while translating it correctly. The implementation of any language is carried out through speech, and as one of our prominent linguists say, Akhmanova defines the communicative function of language as the main function of language. And according to the dictionary by Akhmanova, it is the most important device of human communication. So the main, according to the fair remark of Kolshansky, the main purpose of speech activity is the impact of communications in terms of communication and to achievement of a certain result, and the effect of success motivated by practicability and the intention of the communication. So the effect of such exposure will depend on the choice of the optimal speech devices mostly. Usually the participants of bilingual communication is affected by the system of another language, which is on account to differences in the grammatical structures of modern Russian, English, and Adyg languages. These languages belong to different morphological structures, and based on the genetic classification of languages, we note that the Russian language belongs to the Slavic or Slavonic group of Indo-European languages. English language belongs to the Germanic group of Indo-European language, and Adyg language belongs to the Abkhaz-Adyg group of North Caucasian languages. According to linguistic typology, Russian is a synthetic language, English is analytic language, and Adyg is polysynthetic language. But relation to different language groups and language types of languages reviewed in the study defines the difficulties in the typological comparison and translation from one language to another. However, Belli states that it is theoretically indifferent whether or not they belong to the same historical family of languages while comparing these language systems. In modern linguistics, the pronoun is defined as a lexical semantical class of parts of speech, and it includes a reference to the speech act, to its participants, to speech situation, or to the statement itself. Or it's an indication of the type of speech matching the word with extra linguistic reality. The system of personal pronouns in Russian, English, and Circassian or Adyg is presented in the following table. And as we see, there are similarities, and differences between them. So the table shows that in all three languages, the same type of correlation is observed only in third-person singular, and significant discrepancies are observed in the second person. For example, there are two forms of personal pronouns you when referring to a friend, acquaintance, relative, and you when addressing formal in Russian language. When addressing one person, addressee in the second person is singular. In English, to refer to the addressee, we also use singular or plural, and there is no you apposition because there is only one form of you. It should be noted that in the English and Adyg languages, there is no formal analog to Russian pronoun you. This speech function is implemented lexically in the specified language. And the third-person pronouns in the reviewed languages are heterogeneous. As for the third-person pronouns, they match completely in Russian and English. And it's not the same, it's different in Adyg language. It should be noted that in Adyg language, the pronouns of the third person, I will call them are, mor, that is in a Circassian, combine the functions of personal and deictic words. and they can be defined as personally indicating mostly. Besides the specific language definitions, pronouns may have contextual definitions, which, when translated in a variety of communicative situations, will be implemented in different ways in these three languages. And it is impossible to overestimate the role of context in the production and perception of speech. During the communication, context manifests as through linguistic form and as through extra-linguistic phenomena that characterize the speaker and express its cultural presuppositions. So context directly and immediately affects the perception of the process and provides a listener the opportunity to rely on the verbal and non-verbal environment of language element within its immediate and mediate connections required for recognition of the communicative intentions of the interlocutor. Due to the multifaceted use of personal pronouns in communicative acts and in poetic literary texts, this study examines the contextual meaning for the first mentioned case. So, as for the personal pronouns, you, we can have the following contextual meanings. Here are the examples in three languages with translation. We can speak about the first meaning. We can distinguish between the first meaning, that is friendly attitude, to the familiar addressee, equal in status, age, in official communication environment. As for the next, the second attitude, that is a respectful attitude toward the stranger or friend of addressee, which can be equal or unequal in status, age, in a formal environment of dialogue. So here are the examples in three languages also. There are more attitudes like friendly and respectful attitude, and disrespect, neglect, and familiarity with strangers. I didn't show the examples, but I will just mention them. So all these examples, as you understood, are can be used in the context, because context directly and immediately affects the perception of the process and provides listener the opportunity to rely on the verbal and non-verbal environment of language element within its immediate and mediate connections required for recognition of the communicative intentions. So here we come to the next table. That is comparison of the contextual meaning of the personal pronoun you in Russian, English, and Adyg languages. They are given in these table. And we can say that, and it is showed here, the friendly attitude, respectful attitude, as we have discussed. So in different languages, it is used in different ways, and different pronouns are used. That is, so we can come to the following conclusions that in the system of personal pronouns of Russian, English, and Adyg languages, complete coincidence is observed only in the first person singular and plural. And unlike English and Adyg languages, Russian language has formal "вы" that is used to the addressee in the second person singular. In the Adyg language, third person pronouns are just personal indicative. They are not purely personal. As for the second conclusion, the following contextual meaning of the personal pronouns you were identified in the reviewed languages, like friendly attitude, respectful attitude, friendly and respectful attitude, and disrespect, familiarity, and neglect. And the third and the last conclusion is that the contextual meaning should be considered in translation of the personal pronouns you and you from the English or Adyg to Russian. So it doesn't matter to which language you switch and translate. The following algorithm should be taken into account, like determine the degree of familiarity of the communicants, and formal, informal atmosphere of communication also should be observed, and determine relationships of interlocutor and equality and inequality of status and positions of the people. So that is all for the time being. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to be here and to answer the questions if you have any.
I think it's Iryna RUDYK now. Is that right?
Yes, that's me. Hello.
I don't know if I pronounced correctly your name.
Yes, yeah, that's Iryna. Yes, thank you. So I take it that there's no questions to ask the previous speaker. So that's why I'm taking my turn in starting my presentation. Just a second, I will start screen sharing. All right, so I guess by now you should be able to see the presentation. Can you see that?
Perfect, perfect, yeah.
Okay, okay, lovely. Thank you for letting me know. So let me draw your attention to something completely different to what we have been discussing so far. And let's turn our attention to interactions in clinical settings. The title of my today's report is Redefining Manipulation, Persuading Patients in Clinical Settings. So if we look at interactions with patients in clinical settings, then they have one distinct feature to characterize them. And this feature is institutional character, which imposes imbalance in power. You can see this imbalance in power not only in clinical practice, but also in legal practice, because in both of these instances, the professional, the health professional or the legal professional will occupy the position of privilege, and the client, as you can see, will be left vulnerable, depending on the legal or medical professional and reliant on their goodwill. And these circumstances pose a very important question, that of building trust in institutional interactions. So it's crucial for the professional to learn how to develop in clients trust and confidence. This is one skill which is assessed in the objective structured clinical examinations, which are conducted in medical and legal testing. And in both of these examinations, they are also called OSCEs. Both of them are based on the so-called Miller pyramid, which you see in the slide, which is in front of you at the moment. So this original pyramid was designed by the American psychologist George Miller in 1990 in order to assess doctors' clinical performance and clinical competence. So you can see that there's 4 levels in this pyramid. The bottom level is knowledge, and then building up knowledge are the next levels. First goes the competence, which answers the question knows how, then performance shows how, and finally comes the action. So these higher level skills are assessed in the OSCE examinations, in the objective structured clinical examinations. In these examinations, the candidate has 25 minutes to interact with a mock client. And then after that, the client has to assess the candidate against the set of criteria. And one of such 5 criteria is building trust and confidence in the client, which shows and underlines the importance of knowing how to do that and putting that to practice. So In the next slide, we will have a look at how this trust can be built in clients in such institutionalized settings. So I suggest that we start with the theory, Wallbridge Theory, as it is called, suggested by Professor Halldórsdóttir from Iceland. In this Wallbridge Theory, there's two metaphors, that of the wall and another metaphor for the bridge. So the wall metaphor denotes a communication breakdown, which creates the sense of disconnection and mutual avoidance. And to overcome this problem of the wall, there's another metaphor, bridge, which, if applied, creates in the recipient the sense of openness, connectedness, and helps, obviously, to build an effective interaction. So Professor Halldórsdóttir outlines specific techniques on how to bridge this gap with the recipient or with the client. So we can call them oil gearing techniques. So among the techniques that she refers to are those of mutual self-disclosure, as you see at the top of the slide, then making links to out-of-hospital environment. Another technique, as suggested by the professor, is using a warm voice and other body language, open body language, and calling the patient by the name. Well, this list is by far not exhaustive, and it can be complemented by findings from other works. And making a summary, I suggest that we can add to these techniques, such as nodding to demonstrate involvement. Then another technique that can be found in literature in this field is repeating a keyword from the client's previous statement and using it as the first word or one of the first words in your statement. Then I'm quoting the last two techniques, trying not to come across as negative and seeming to care about the patient. Now, while these techniques obviously do not seek to disadvantage the patient or the client, they seem in spirit and even in wording, particularly if you have a look at the last two techniques, to be manipulative in nature, trying not to come across as negative, meaning that you can be negative inside, but you must invest effort in not coming across as negative or seeming to care about the patient. So there's some manipulative feeling about this. So the question that I've been asking myself is whether these techniques are indeed cases of manipulation, or do they differ from standard manipulations? Now, these are the questions that I suggest we discuss briefly in today's report about the type of influence that these cases represent and these techniques of bridging techniques, whether this influence is positive or negative, and how this is related to manipulation. I suggest that I suggest that we start with defining the types of manipulation. The starting point here could be the classification developed by Professor Robert Noggle, and he bases his classification on three mental states, those of beliefs, desires, and emotions. Respectively, Professor Noggle identifies manipulation of the victim's beliefs. We talk about the victim because that's the context is about manipulation. Then second type is manipulation of the victim's desires. And lastly, manipulation of the victim's emotions. Now, if we use this classification and apply this classification to the cases, to those bridging techniques that I referred to earlier, then I think that you will agree that those cases seem to fall within two of these three categories: manipulation of desires and manipulation of emotions. We manipulate desires if we try to instill in the subject a desire that does not conform to this subject's beliefs, as is the case with tempting, for example. Well, this desire does not conform to the client's beliefs or to the subject's beliefs. We applying this category to the cases of bridging techniques, we talk about manipulation of desires because we instill in the client a desire to share some very personal experience with a total stranger. That's why it seems to fall within the category of manipulating desires. And now, in terms of manipulating emotions, we manipulate emotions when we incite in the client an inappropriate emotional state. Such an inappropriate emotional state, in case of bridging techniques, can be trust in the stranger. That can be a doctor or a lawyer. So it seems to be an inappropriate emotional state for the client. However, intuitively, I hope that you would agree that techniques from clinical interactions or other institutional interactions seem to be different in nature than, for example, tempting or sulking. Now, the question is, what makes them different? And first of all, I suggest that we have a look at the major features of manipulation, which are commonly identified by all the researchers, most researchers in the field. So these are three features, and the first of them is pressure on the target. Another feature which is commonly identified as being characteristic of manipulation is its covert character. And the third typical feature is advantage to the influencer. When we talk about imposing pressure on the target, we mean that the influencer or manipulator interferes with the target's autonomy and compels the target to act, think, or feel in a certain way. Well, covert character is clear because the influence which is imposed by the influencer bypasses the target's reason. And everything is clear and self-explanatory in terms of the third criterion, advantage to the influencer. Now let's apply these three criteria to analyzing the bridging techniques from my earlier slides. So if we have a look at the pressure on the target, then this first characteristic for manipulation will target three mental states, as I said earlier: beliefs, desires, and emotions. That's how the victim or the subject is controlled. In terms of bridging techniques, it seems that the influencer only controls the subject through controlling the desires and emotions, not the subject's beliefs. So that's the first difference. Now, if we have a look at the second technique, the covert character, so it's certainly present in the cases that we analyzed in the earlier slides, those bridging techniques, and that's what makes those cases very similar to manipulation. There's one more feature to analyze: advancing the influencer's interests. That's the biggest difference between the cases of bridging techniques and the cases of manipulation, because the professional turns the client's antagonism into cooperation in order to help improve a certain aspect of the client's life. So if we believe that, then that gives us two important consequences or two important implications. The first implication is obvious, that the such interactions in clinical settings and other institutional settings serve the client interests. But another implication is more subtle. Nevertheless, it's just as important as the first one. As a result of such influence, the client's expected action, or the action which the client or the subject is expected to perform, will be applied to someone or something unrelated to the influencer. I hope that can be better seen from the drawing in the next slide. You can see the influencer performing a certain action, sending a certain message to the client or the subject. As a result of such influence, the subject or the client is expected to undertake a certain action. But this action will be applied to something or someone who is not related to the influencer. So the circle is not closed, as you can see. And if we compare and try to draw schematically represent a case of manipulation, then here's what we will get. We will get a closed loop. We start with the influencer, who utters an utterance, sends a message to the client. As a result of this influence, the client is supposed, or intended at least, to undertake a certain action. And this action will be applied to someone or something which is related to the influencer. So we, in fact, in manipulations, have influencer-centered loops which close on the influencer. So that's the biggest difference, in my opinion, and between manipulations and those other alignments or influences that we have been discussing earlier. So I suggest that we differentiate these influences from manipulation. And in order to be differentiated from manipulation, these non-manipulative behavioral alignments should satisfy three conditions based on what I have been discussing so far. First, they should serve the subject's interests or the client's interests. Second, they should result in the subject's actions applied to something or someone unrelated to the influencer. And finally, the third condition will be that they should influence the subject's desires and emotions, one of these two, and not the subject's beliefs. Now, let's have a closer look at beliefs. Why not beliefs? It seems to me that covert influence on the subject's beliefs, as is the case in lying, for example, when you make the subject believe something that you yourself do not believe, so that's a covert influence on the subject's beliefs, will always be manipulative, except cases of the so-called white lie. Why do I think that white lies should be excluded from this rule? It all lies in what we understand under white lies. If we refer to dictionary definitions of white lies, we'll see that white lie is interpreted as a means to avoid hurting someone. As an example, you see a definition from Cambridge Dictionary at the bottom of the slide. A white lie is a lie that is told in order to be polite or to stop someone from being upset by the truth. I think that this definition and other definitions to give us grounds to say that white lies target the subject's emotions rather than beliefs. You can see the key words: politeness, being upset. So it's all about emotions. That's why I believe that white lie cases target the subject's emotions, not beliefs. So that's not lying. That's why it does conform to the rule that non-manipulative influence cannot target the subject's beliefs. So based on this, we can make the conclusion that white lies are not manipulative. Now, at the next stage, I suggest that we have a look at a couple of examples. For example, an easy example to consider is telling the children that Santa is real. Now, does this seem manipulative to you? Saying that Santa is real? Because I've been considering this case myself for some time. Now, if we consider that that's manipulation, then does it mean that it would be better to tell them the truth? But the counter argument will be that by telling the children that Santa is not real, will take away some of the fun of Christmas. Right? So I think that that proves that telling the children that Santa is real is aimed at influencing the children's emotions and not their beliefs. Right? And considering that this is also done to serve the child's interests and also not to cause the child to perform any action related to the influencer, we can call this saying as non-manipulative behavioral alignment. Or another example, that of three people, Michael, Wendy, and Susan. Assuming that Michael is married to Wendy, then imagine that Wendy does something that does not seem right to Susan. And Susan would like Michael to influence Wendy, or at least to be critical of her behavior as well. Now let's analyze the three conditions that I have listed earlier. Suppose that Susan is acting in Michael's best interests. She only wishes well to him. Now, so this condition is satisfied. Now, condition 3, let's just skip number 2 and get back to it a bit later. Condition 3, Susan seeks to influence Michael's emotions mainly, maybe desires, but not his beliefs. So condition 3 is also met. And that leaves us with the third condition, with condition 2. The question to be asked here is whether Michael's expected action will be applied to someone or something unrelated to Susan. If the answer is yes, the action will be applied to someone unrelated to Susan, then it's non-manipulative. The answer can be yes if Susan, for example, is a therapist or is a lawyer, right? Is some professional who is not related to Wendy. The answer will be yes, because creating a negative emotional environment around Wendy will not be related to Susan. But if we imagine that Susan, or assume that Susan is Michael's mother, for example, then the picture is totally different. And especially if, as it happens, she rather dislikes Wendy, right? So if she tries to influence Michael in a way that will make him critical of Wendy's behavior, then this time...
4 minutes, okay?
Okay, yes, I'm almost finished, yes. So that's then a case of manipulation. And now I would like just to put what I have been talking about into a broader scheme of things. I suggest that we look at Norman Fairclough's classification of all types of influence into coercion and consent. That's what Norman Fairclough distinguishes between. And he says that these are two ways to impose some influence, some power on a person. Now, I think that what can be added to this scheme is the third element in the middle, behavioral alignment. What differs this type of influence from the other two is its covert character, because I believe that both coercion and consent are of overt character, because consent happens through rational persuasion and coercion happens through use of force or threat. Behavioral alignment is covert, that is, the subject doesn't notice it. And behavioral alignment, based on the characteristics that I've covered today, can be manipulative in nature or non-manipulative. Then we can call it non-manipulative behavioral alignment. So that's all that I've been planning to share with you today. Thank you. So I'm stopping screen sharing. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's any questions, I will be happy to address them. If not, then I guess the floor goes to the next speaker.
Simona, Anastasio, are you Italian?
Yes. Yes, hi everyone.
Piacere.
Piacere, oui. Oh, yes, sorry. I'm Italian, but I've been living in France for several years, so I'm from Paris. So I'm Italian, but I live in France.
Nice.
Okay. So I will try to share my screen. So I think I managed to try.
Irene, where are you from, Irene? RUDYK?
From Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Yes.
You, Barbara?
I'm also from Italy.
Italy.
Sì, italiana.
Italiana.
But
yes, I think
my
Barbara
first
said.
language is German.
Nice.
That's why I talked about research in this German-speaking part of Italy. But we have three languages: Italian, German, and Latin.
Oh, nice. What exactly is your region? Nearly?
Alto Adige, Bolzano.
Ah, Bolzano. I have a friend in Bolzano.
Sorry, can you see my screen? My presentation?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Perfect. Full screen.
Okay. So today I will present you a part of a bigger project dealing with second language acquisition. But in this talk, I want just to focus my attention on the native speakers, so English, French, and Italian native speakers, when they have to verbalize a spatial information. So I will try to give you I hope to give a contribution to language cognition debate. So this is my discussion plan. So first of all, I present you my research issues, theoretical background research goals, my methodology, some results, and discussion. So this study, or this talk, investigates the way native speakers conceptualize and code linguistically motion events and the impact of typological properties in linguistic productions when speakers have to verbalize a motion event. So, as many studies proved, it exists a topological variation in languages in the way speakers code manner and path information. So, as you can see in these two examples, there are some languages such as English, which tends to lexicalize manner in the main verb and path outside the main verb through a cross in this case. In other languages such as Italian and French and Spanish, speakers tend to lexicalize path information in the main verb and manner outside the main verb. So this study exploits a thinking for speaking hypothesis proposed by Slovin in 1996. According to the author, spatial conceptualization may vary according to languages. So we want to try to understand to what extent do conceptual linguistic categories influence our L1 spatial verbalization? I want also to evaluate the influence of tasks employed on verbalization of motion events. So, as for the theoretical background, first of all, it is important to say what is a motion event. So, we want to use here the Talmian terminology. So we can say that a motion event is a translational motion. That is the basic location of an object. An object shifts from one point to another. So according to the Talmi, there are 4 basic internal components in a motion event. So the notion of motion, figure, that is the moving entity, the ground, the object with respect to which the figure moves, and path, that is the trajectory followed by the figure. But there are also some external co-events, that is the manner in which the entity moves and the cause provoking the motion. So in this study, we used the typological classification based on path information proposed by Talmi. So according to the author, we can identify 2 groups of language. Sublite framed languages, including Germanic and Slavic languages on the one hand, and verb framed languages, including Romance languages in the other hand. So as for the first group, as I said, these languages tend to code manner and or curves and no motion in the verb root, such as floated here in these 2 examples, and path information in particles outside the main verbs that's Talmi called satellites, for instance, into and out. On the contrary, so in Romance languages, motion and path are encoded in the verb root. So here we can see the examples in Spanish, entro, salió, and manner in a separate constituent, for instance, in a gerundive form, flutando. But what is important to say is that starting from the typological classification proposed by Talmi, some other authors have tried to explain why verb-framed languages do not resort to manner verbs in some contexts. So according to Ask and Slobin and Hoiting, in satellite frame languages, we can use a manner verb in every each type of situations, especially that is in boundary or not boundary crossing situation. So the example 3a, he ran into the house, is a clear example of a boundary crossing constraint. That is, we can talk about a boundary crossing situation when the start and the end point of a motion take place in 2 different places. On the contrary, he ran towards the house. There is no boundary crossing constraint. So for verb-framed languages, the main verb can express manner only when there is no boundary crossing situations. For instance, corrió hasta la casa. Here there is no boundary crossing situation. Entró a la casa corriendo. Here there is a boundary crossing, and so you can explain manner, but you have to use a gerundive form. So in 2004-2006, Slobin proposed a claim based on manner salience, so another component of a motion event. going from high manner salient languages to low manner salient languages. So high manner salient languages are languages in which speakers pay a great attention to manner, and so they tend to express linguistically this component, this spatial component, especially because of the existence in this language of a larger lexicon of manner verbs. This is not the case for verb-framed languages. So in verb-framed languages, we do not have a lot of manner verbs. So speakers tend to not pay attention to this component and to express manner very, very seldom. But the author, Slobin, also points out that these typological differences are just tendencies we can observe in languages. We cannot talk about absolute differences between languages. Recently, some research paid attention on intratypological variation, that is within the same type, language type, the same group, we can find intratypological variation. This is the case, for instance, of Italian and French as for motion, as for the expression of motion events, because Italian can be considered as more satellite than French, because of the existence of some analytical constructions that we call syntagmatic verbs, such as here in the example, la rana salta via dal barattolo. We can say that salta via corresponds to jumps out in English in this context. And in French, this type of construction is very, very rare. So it's not so frequent. So there are 4 research goals that guide this study, this talk. The first one is how to code motion events in oral narrative tasks in English, French, and Italian, to explore if the real usages of these 3 languages reflect Chalmers' typological classification as Slobin's manner claim, but also according to the type of task employed. We want also to investigate the possible intratypological variation in language production between French and Italian, and to explore the relation between spatial cognition and language. So for the methodology, so we investigated 3 languages, Italian, English, and French. So English, as I said, is considered as a satellite-framed language, and Italian and French has verb-framed languages. So our hypothesis, we expected that our data should confirm the typological classification proposed by Chalmers. But we also want to, especially to investigate these intratypological variation between French and Italians, because so we expected to find some satellite constructions in Italian, such as andare via, which we can translate andare via by using go away, correre via, run away, venir fuori, come out. So I want to say that, so I repeat what I said before, this is just a very small part of a bigger project about psycholanguage acquisition. So the data I present today represent the control group, so the result we found in control group. So the participants are native speakers of English, French, and Italian. They are between 20 and 30 years old. They have a university degree, sometimes a PhD too, and they have been registered in the native country. So in Italian for English native speakers, in France, and in Italy. So we analyzed motion events produced by these native speakers into tasks, the frog story, and a video, a cartoon rec show. So all the participants have to accomplish a complex verbal task, and this is due to our desire to investigate, to analyze the expression of a spatial information from the moment of its conceptualization to its verbalization, linguistic formulation. So there is a question which guides this type of task, that is what happened to the protagonist in time X. So all narrative data were collected by means of 2 stimuli in order to test voluntary motion by means of a 24 wordless pictures story, that is the frog story, which has been largely exploited in studies in first and second language acquisition, and a Polish cartoon, a Reksho video used by Batorek in the project APN in 2004, because there is a scene which is particularly interesting in this cartoon, which can we can say which can ask people to pay attention to caused motion. So anyway, in both of the tasks, there are a lot of translational situations of the characters. The corpus I present today, but also the corpus in L2, is available on a platform Ortolang. So if you're interested in this type of data, you can contact me, and I can give you the possibility to see the data. So data were transcribed according to the top parameters, and productions were analyzed from two angles in qualitative and quantitative terms. So first of all, we focus our attention on information focus, that is, which is the focus of the speaker, path, manner, cause, or path and manner, path and cause, or the three components. And which is the information locus, that is the distribution of these three spatial components between the verb root, and in this regard we analyze the types of verbs, of motion verbs, and the other linguistic devices such as particles, adverbs, prepositional phrases. So as for the results, for the information focus in the frog story, you can see in this graphic that all the native speakers focused their attention on the path component, which is something we expected, because path represents the most basic component in a motion unit. But what it is significantly important here is that English native speakers tend to use manner verbs more than French and Italian native speakers. So there is a significant difference in calling manner by means of verbs such as tiptoe, spike, tumble, pop, sneak. The same results, globally the same results, have been found for the information focus in Reksho. So all the native speakers pay attention to path information, but in this way, in this case, there is no significant difference in the expression of these three components. But which is interesting anyway is that cause is encoded slightly more than manner in these three languages in this task, especially in the scene where there is a caused motion. So where Reksho, that is the dog, managed to haul his master, the little boy, onto the shore. So the most frequent verbs we found here to express cause are pull up, pull out in English, tirer, attraper in French, tirare su, tirare fuori in Italian. So as for the information locus, so the distribution of the components between verbs and other linguistic devices, here English native speakers tend to use satellite frame patterns. So we can see that they tend to express path, especially outside the main verb, and there is a great attention to manner systematically expressed in the main verb. For French and Italian, as expected, native speakers of these languages tend to use path to express path in the verb, but contrarily to what has been shown in literature, when manner is expressed in these two languages, is very seldom coded outside the verb. So the native speakers tend to prefer to use a manner verb. The same result can be found for the information locus in Reksho. So path in English is expressed especially outside the verb, and we can see that in French and Italian there is no significant difference in coding manner in verbs or outside main verbs. As for the intratypological variation, so we found this type of variation in French and Italian data in both of the tasks. So we can say that Italian can be considered as more satellite frame than French. So we can say that Italian is an hybrid framed language differently from French, or a path salient languages because of the coexistence of verb and subline structures. So we can also say that Italian is less systematic than French with respect to locus. In our data, path is expressed in the verb and outside the verb with almost the same frequency. So there is not a significant difference in the coding of path information in Italian. So each Italian speaker has used some satellite lexicalization patterns. So here, these two graphics show that for English, we can see that there are lots of particles exploited by native speakers. In French, we never found particles. And in Italian, there are in any case some particles which have been used. So the difference in using syntagmatic verbs into tasks is the fact that in the frog story, the syntagmatic verbs is used in a boundary crossing constraint situation and in no boundary crossing situation. So boundary crossing situation, for example, la rana salta via dal barattolo, so the frog jumps out from the jar. Here there is a boundary crossing situation, but la rana esce fuori dal barattolo, there is no boundary crossing situation because this particle, there is boundary crossing situation, but we do not find manner verb, first of all, and here the particle is redundant because the particle expresses the spatial information which has already been coded in the verb. In Rection, on the contrary, this type of syntagmatic verbs have been used especially to express caused motions, so by means of the verbs tirare su, tirare fuori, pull up, pull out. So for the conclusion, I can say that globally our data confirm the intertypological variation proposed by Talmy and Slobin. So English native speakers tend to adopt satellite frame pattern. French and Italian native speakers tend to adopt verb frame patterns. There is no difference in the amount of motion verb used, but the difference lies in the types of motion verb used. That is, manner motion verbs are especially exploited in English. So as for intertypological variation, the coexistence of syntagmatic and verb framed patterns is stronger in Italian than in French because we do not found this type of construction in our French data, even though there are some other satellite construction which are possible in French. And we also found that satellite constructions in Italian are especially frequent for the verbalization of caused motion and in boundary crossing or no boundary crossing situation. As for language, the relation between language and cognition, certainly linguistic structures play an important role on conceptualization and verbalization of motion events. And so, for instance, English native speakers tend to express manner because they have in their language manner verbs. Nevertheless, it is also important to say that it is important to avoid rigid categorization because each language has different options that go beyond its typological properties. So our speakers, our native speakers in this study, do not adhere strictly to the typological contrasts between satellite and verb framed languages. So I want to give also some perspectives because there is an ongoing study on German. So today I cannot present the German data because we are still studying on this data. We also want to use more control tasks to better measure the impact of the task on linguistic productions. And I recently started to focus also on written productions in order to compare oral narratives and written data in L1 and especially in L2, which is my area of interest. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Bentia, are you there? No. Let's see here. Then Heart in Rustafelli's Night in the Panther's Skin. And these are Brazilian elementary students.
Yes, yeah. I'm here.
I think it should be you. Are you from Brazil, Tamiris?
Yes.
Okay.
But now I'm in Belgium.
Belgium, nice. In Brussels?
Yes.
Nice. Do you study with José Moraes? Oh, nice.
And
Virginie Kolinski?
Oui.
Oh, nice.
Oui. Like Simona, I'm a little bit confused by languages.
Simona, you live in Paris, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so but you are Italian but live in Paris.
Yes, I've been living in Paris for 9 years almost.
Nice. So Tamiris, could you start? Would you like to share your screen? Tamiris, weren't you at Uniski in 2019 with Virginie Kolinski?
No.
Because she went to Uniski in Rio Grande do Sul, Virginie Kolinski with a student, with a PhD student.
No, but it wasn't me. I don't know. Oh, let me see. Are you seeing my screen?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Full screen.
Yes, very good.
Okay. It's full screen?
Yes, we see.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll start. So my name is Tamiris, and today I'll be presenting a part of my PhD that is Brazilian elementary students' reading and writing skills, phonological and visual predictors. So learning to read and to write is not something that we can do in a day. It's a process. And involves the development of a series of skills through years of schooling. There are some models that have been proposed to try to understand this development. One of these models is the dual root model, and this model describes two roots that can be used during reading. The first one is the phonological root, that is used by beginning readers and by skilled readers during reading unfamiliar words or pseudo words. And there's also the lexical root that is mostly used by skilled readers in reading familiar or irregular words. And there are several factors that are involved in this development, such as working memory, phonological awareness, visual perception, visual attention, and rapid automized naming. And some studies have investigated how these factors, such as phonological awareness, impact in the development of reading in different languages. And these studies found that the level of orthographic transparency can modulate the importance of these factors. So as we can see here, alphabetic orthographies differ from with respect to how consistently letters can represent sounds of oral language. So opaque orthographies, such as English, have letters often pronounced different in different words, as more transparent languages, such as Italian, for example, letters sound almost the same in every word. So phonological awareness has a high impact in more opaque languages when compared to more transparent ones. And Portuguese, as we can see here, is a language in the middle of this continuum. So, as I said, these are models and studies that were made mostly about reading, the reading development. And there are still a few studies about the impact of these factors, such as phonological awareness, working memory, in writing. And since most of the studies are conducted with English speakers, phonological awareness has been considered one of the most important factors in learning to read. So we started to think about the other factors, such as the visual ones, like visual spatial working memory and visual perception. So the objective of this study is to analyze how visual and phonological processing skills contribute to reading and writing performances in decoders versus more advanced readers, and understand the contribution of those skills to the development of reading and writing. So for now, we had 26 literate children participating in our study. They range from 6 to 11 years old, and they were attending to the 1st to the 5th grade of 2 Brazilian private schools. So this is a cross-sectional correlational study, and we had 2 groups divided according to the dual root model, each one with 13 participants. So we had the first group, we called the decoders. They used mostly the phonological root, and they had it had children from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And we had the second group, the more advanced readers. They used mostly the lexical root, and they were from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. So our instruments were for reading, the isolated words and pseudo-word reading test, and the performance was measured in terms of accuracy. For reading, it was a dictation test, and the performance was measured in terms of errors. We also measured phonological awareness with the oral production test, phonological working memory with the repetition test, visual spatial working memory with the ANASTASIO task, and we had an N of 0, 1, and 2. Visual perception, it was the DTVP2 visual perception test, and we had we worked with 4 subtests: the spatial position, form constancy, visual closure, and figure ground. And we had rapid automized naming tests, and we had also 4 subtests: the object, color, letter, and numbers. So I will be presenting now the preliminary results. So for the general correlations, we had significant correlations with all variables, so between reading and all variables, and between writing and all variables. And also we had stronger correlations between reading and RUM, and between writing and phonological awareness, and writing and RUM. For the comparisons between the 2 groups, we had correlations for both groups between reading and RUM, and between writing and phonological working memory, and writing and RUM. And only for the first group, so the decoders, we had a correlation between reading and phonological working memory and reading and visual spatial working memory. And for the writing, between writing and phonological awareness. And we also conduct some ANOVA. So for phonological awareness, we had differences with higher performance in the supraphonemic part of the test in comparison with the phonemic one, but no differences between the two groups. For phonological working memory, participants were better in words than in pseudo words, but no differences between groups. For visual spatial working memory, there were differences between ANIBAC levels, but again, not between groups. And the only differences between groups were in visual perception and RAM, and we also had differences between the subtests. So overall, we found that RAM has a strong correlation with both reading and writing, which can indicate that RAM can be a strong predictor for both variables. For the group comparisons, again, RAM had a strong correlation with reading and writing for both groups. There are some studies that couldn't find this correlation between RAM and reading and writing, but mostly because they used only one of the subtests, like objects, for example. So we intend to conduct some analysis to see if one of the subtests is more important for the reading and writing. So as phonological working memory, phonology seems to be an important factor for both groups in terms of writing. And for phonological awareness, it seems to be important in the beginning of writing, which is compatible with the use of the phonological root in the first group. And for the ANOVA, for now, we found that visual perception and RAM are the factors differentiating groups. But since our sample is small still, we hope that with a larger sample, we can conduct a more robust analysis to see if these results stand this. So this leads me to the future directions. So one of the things we intend to do is to increase the sample. I hope that by the time I go back to Brazil, the pandemic will be better. And we intend also to conduct some regression analysis to see which variables better predict performance in reading and writing. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I was the last one. I don't know if the other two that were before me arrived.
Okay, let's see who's next. I think you were the last. Is there anybody missing? Actually, I'm not exactly the coordinator. I'm just the monitor. But let's see if we.
Yeah, you became the coordinator.
Yeah. Okay. Soon, I think in 1 hour, actually, we are going to have a kind of toast. Yeah, a drinking or a closing ceremony. Professor Katia, Professor Marcus, would anybody like to to say comment.
It's a great talk. I think this is a very promising work, Tamiris. Congratulations. I was just in doubt about how you separated the groups. It was because I was a little late because I was in another room, but maybe you can comment a little further on that.
Yeah, by the end of my work, we intend to conduct the analysis, separating the groups in each one of the series. So first, second, but since the sample was too small, we thought about dividing these two groups according to the dual root model. So we thought about the performance in reading and writing, and the use of the phonological root and the lexical root.
Makes sense. Good. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, guys, I think if everybody has, for example, does anybody have any other question?
No, seems to be no questions.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can finish that here soon. I think we're going to have another link for the farewell ceremony. Okay, so see you later. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.